Hi folks, I'm Chris Marshall with Woodworker's Journal magazine. If you use a router and a jig to cut dovetails and box joints, you already know that it can be a hit or miss proposition. You set your jig up carefully, you studiously read through the manual to learn all you can, you dial in the jig and make some careful, straight and true test pieces to get the best possible results, and then you set out to make those important test cuts. And then the moment of truth comes. You pull the work pieces out of the jig and try and fit them together, and they don't fit together right. They're too tight, they're too loose, or worse yet, they don't fit together at all. And then you're left wondering, what did you do wrong? What aspect of the jig setup did you not get quite right? Did you miss something in the manual? Did it have something to do with how you were feeding the router over the jig? Is it a deficiency in the jig itself? You're left with more questions than you are answers. And so then you start fiddling and making more test cuts and trying different things, all with the goal of getting one good glue-ready joint. And when you finally land on it and cut your parts for that project and put it all away, you've got this sinking feeling that the next time you need to use the jig, you're going to have to go through the same learning process all over again. It's really frustrating. Well, through the years, I've had the opportunity to use many different routing jigs for making joinery, and I've run into this same problem myself. I've made lots and lots of test cuts, and I've learned that it's very difficult with some jigs to set them up accurately and get consistent results. That's why it was refreshing recently when I had the opportunity to try out Leigh Industries' new RTJ 400 router table jig. I'm reviewing it as our August 2015 tool preview tool, and I really think that Leigh is going to help us take a big step forward in making router joinery easier and more consistent. I recently spent about half a day with this jig, and I was able to make these 6 different joint examples by following the manual from start to finish. But what I want to point out, and what is of particular importance, is it only took 2 or 3 test cuts to get glue-ready results from all of these joints. And they're not even the same joints. I've got through dovetails, half-pitch through dovetails, I cut half-blind dovetails, and 3 different sizes of box joints, all in the same afternoon using the RTJ 400. Now, I can't tell you in a few minutes of video time everything you need to know about the RTJ 400. It's far too complex for that. You need to go out to leighjigs.com and learn more about it, watch Leigh's promotional videos, and of course read our tool preview in the August issue. But I would like to spend a few minutes here telling you about some of the aspects of this jig that make it quick to set up, easy to understand, and capable of giving you the kind of repeatable joinery results that you expect, because Leigh has minimized the number of variables that are at work here. Now, one aspect concerning the consistency and simplicity of this jig is just how you interact with it. As I've mentioned, it's a router table only jig, so unlike many dovetailing jigs, which have a template that faces up and you're feeding a plunge router over the top of the template, which actually can introduce errors based on how you feed the tool, Leigh is taking the handheld router out of this equation. All of the business for this jig happens template side down. And the 400 in the name RTJ 400 refers to 400 millimeters, or about 16 inches. It'll handle work pieces up to 400 millimeters wide. So that gives you a real broad base to move this jig over your router table. There's a pair of handles on each end, and you've got gravity working in your favor. So provided your router table is flat, your feed consistency is assured. Now, the template for this jig is made out of aircraft-grade aluminum, and it's milled on one side with these broader open fingers for cutting the pin side of a joint. And on the other side of the template, it has closer spaced fingers for milling the tail side of a joint. And depending on what you're making, if it's dovetail joints, you'll use a dovetail bit on one side of the template and a straight bit on the other side of the template. And the basic style of the template, this two-sided approach, is not novel. There's a lot of jigs on the market that use this same basic convention. But what is important to note about the RTJ 400 is how this vertical fence portion interfaces with the template, and that's definitely worth a closer look. Unlike the fences or backstops on some styles of templating jigs that are fixed in place, Leigh makes the fence on the RTJ 400 easy to remove. There's just two clamps that swivel open on each end of the fence, and it lifts right off. Now there's a couple of advantages for being able to do that. One, you can turn the fence around to face whichever side of the template you need to use for the joint you're making or the part of the joint you're making. But the other advantage is a removable fence allows the fence to be indexed in relation to where it falls on the template. So it enables one template for this jig to cut three distinctively different styles of joints: through dovetails, half-blind dovetails, and box joints. And Leigh also makes it easy to know where to position the fence on the template. There are a couple of pins on the handles of the fence, and they fit down into holes and slots that are milled into the template on either corner to index which joint you're making. Then swinging the clamps closed locks the fence in position, and you're ready to go. So the fence position also has no variables to it. As long as you follow the manual, put the fence into the right holes and slots, and lock it in place, you can't make a mistake. And once you've got the fence properly located on the template in its holes and slots for the joints you want to make, Leigh provides sturdy cam action clamps for locking workpieces securely in place for routing. There's a pair on the fence as well as on the template for holding backup boards to help minimize blowout as you're routing, or when you need to route both sides of a joint at one time, like half-blind dovetails. There's also a pair of adjustable stops on the fence, and they serve the usual purpose, but they also have a secondary value that I want to point out here as well. These stops actually have 2 points of contact, one right here for the fence board, and a second point of contact right here for the template board. And that's particularly useful in cases where both halves of the joint need to be cut at the same time, like in the case of this half-blind dovetail joint. This offset on some router dovetail jigs can take you forever to figure out, and it's very important for good joint fitment. But it's not tough on the RTJ 400 because the offset is automatically calibrated for you. And one last feature of the RTJ 400 that really makes it stand out and easy to use is Leigh Industries' use of its E-bush guide bushing system. It's a proprietary item that you'll find on other Leigh dovetailing jig products, and I'm glad they've incorporated that technology here too. Now at first glance it looks like a typical guide bushing that you'd use for template routing, but there's an important difference here. The collar itself is elliptical rather than perfectly round. And effectively what that allows you to do is change the amount of offset between the bit and the fingers of the template. So if you've got a tight fitting joint, turning the E-bush one direction allows the bit to cut away more material to loosen up that joint part. Or if you've got a loose fitting joint, turning the E-bushing the other direction allows the bit to cut away less material, so you'll tighten up the fit. In most cases, if you've got the fence in the right position on the template and you're using the correct bit, this is the only variable you need to play with to change how a joint fits together. And it's got demarcations on it, so you can change the fit of your joint parts in thousandths of an inch for absolute control. Think how many variables you've had to play around with other dovetailing and box joint jigs, but on the RTJ 400, this is it. Now the standard jig kit includes 2 carbide dovetail bits and 2 straight bits, the E-bush guide collar and a wrench for adjusting it, these helpful plastic blockers that you can snap into the template to keep you from routing where you don't belong for certain joints, a really well-written and illustrated spiral-bound manual that walks you through each and every step of the joint making process, a DVD so you can learn how to make these joints in real time, watching them done. And if you misplace your manual, there's even these quick reference strips for each of the joints that fit right in the top of the fence. Leigh also makes an accessory set for the RTJ 400 that includes 9 more router bits in another E-bushing size. So these bits plus the accessory set will allow you to cut every joint that appears in the manual. I really think that Leigh Industries is making dovetailing and box joint making with a router and jig so much easier than it used to be. So if you're in the market for a versatile jig that cuts a broad variety of joints, give the RTJ 400 a closer look. You can learn more about it at leigjigs.com or through a Leigh products distributor near you. Thanks for watching.